The Peace of the Atomic Bomb. (1944). Iwo Jima is a black dot in the immense Pacific blue, 600 nautical miles south of Japan. With a land surface of 20 square kilometers, this volcanic island of hills and gorges has hardly any vegetation. Known as Sulphur Island, its cracked soil gives off a strong smell of sulfurous gases. Iwo Jima is halfway between the U.S. bases on the Mariana Islands, and only a 3-hour flight from Tokyo. The Japanese had constructed 2 airfields on the island and a radar station capable of detecting enemy planes at long range. The island's runways are a vitally important objective for the Allies. The U.S. Air Force needs them for its Mustang squadrons, which are to serve as escorts for the B-29s flying to Tokyo. The Japanese know this and are determined not to relinquish them. Iwo Jima is under the command of General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. His plan of defense for the island does not envisage banzai charges or frantic counterattacks on the beaches. His strategy is based on the capacity to resist and on wearing down and surprising the enemy. The civilians who work in the sulfur mines have been evacuated, and 22,000 heavily armed soldiers prepare for the last battle of their lives. Kuribayashi gets his meticulous plan underway. He divides the island into separate defensive sectors. Each one is surrounded with artillery, mortars, mines, and bunkers, situated both on the plain and on the hillsides. The island is a hive of rock and cement. 5 levels of interconnected tunnels, more than 8 meters below the ground, give the Japanese mobility and provide shelter from bombardments. Banzai charges and hand-to-hand fighting are expressly forbidden. The Americans will have to search for the Japanese troops inside their hideouts. When the attack begins, any advance will have to be made over dead Japanese bodies. Tadamichi Kuribayashi is a samurai and sums up his defense plan with the word desperation. December 8th. The American B-24s announced their presence on the island. The Japanese have been using Iwo Jima to prepare attacks on the B-29 bases in the Mariana Islands. Admiral Nimitz has been thinking about the invasion of the island for some time and gives it priority. His idea is to neutralize it first and take it in February, so that the American public can feel proud of their soldiers. Authorization is given for the invasion to be transmitted live by radio. The firepower that has been built up is impressive, and nothing is lacking to start the operation. During 74 days, the B-24s hammer the island with the longest bombing campaign of the whole Pacific War. But very few of the heavily entrenched Japanese positions on the islands are seriously damaged. And its anti-aircraft guns do not allow the American planes to get away scot-free. February 12, 1945. 485 ships are ready to begin Operation Detachment, the invasion of Iwo Jima. The island has no port and only one beach on its east coast, the place chosen for the landings. A total of 250,000 men, including 75,000 Marines, veterans of the Pacific War, are ready to take the island within 10 days. The ships form up close to the Mariana Islands and sail northwards to join with Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet, making the most powerful armada yet, gathered under one flag. D-Day is set for the 19th of February. First to go into action will be the 75,000 Marines under General Holland M. Howlin' Mad Smith. The 4th and 5th Divisions will form part of the second wave of assault, while the 3rd will remain in reserve on the shore. From the start of the operation, the Japanese are aware of the movements of the American fleet. Their reconnaissance planes and submarines follow it all the way. Kuribayashi is alerted. The invasion is expected from the 15th of February. February 16th. The U.S. planes bombing Japan from the Mariana Islands without escorts are being shot down easily. And the American fleet comes under pressure from the high command to take the island as soon as possible. The poor weather prevents air raids, and instead the decision is taken for the battleships to begin the bombardment of Iwo Jima with 500-kilo shells over 3 days. Divers examining the coast around the beach find no obstacles. Monday, February 19th, 1945. D-Day. The U.S. Intelligence Service wrongly estimates that there are 13,000 Japanese entrenched on Iwo Jima, when in fact there are 22,000. 3 miles offshore, the landing craft wait for the signal to head for the beach. The Marines expect to find an island blown to bits and soldiers demoralized by the continual heavy bombardments, which have included the use of napalm. A few meters from the beach, rocket launchers open fire on the coast to facilitate the landings of the assault troops. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the first landing craft hit the beach of Futatsune on the southwest of the island without meeting opposition from the Japanese artillery. Faced by this strained situation, the Marines decide to advance inland, meeting their first obstacle after 300 meters in the steep slope of the beach formed by the volcanic ash, where the troops slip and fall in their heavy equipment. The armored vehicles that are supposed to lead the way also struggle to overcome this natural barrier. An hour after the first landing, and with the American troops trying to find a way to unblock the beach, which has filled up with the continual disembarkations of soldiers, tanks, artillery pieces, and ammunition, the Japanese artillery and machine guns open fire. Dominating the beach on Iwo Jima is Mount Suribachi, an extinguished volcano. Now, a mortal fire pours down from its slopes onto the beach. The hell experienced on the coast of Northern Europe at Omaha is repeated here in the Pacific. The soldiers find themselves faced by an abruptly rising terrain and pinned down by artillery, machine gun, and rifle fire that increases in volume and accuracy. The beach is an inferno. Packed with men and material, the casualties increase alarmingly. Dead and wounded men blocking the path of the tanks and bulldozers, as the stunned commanders desperately search for a way out to enable them to get up to the plateau. The Marines call for help, and the naval artillery begins a heavy bombardment of the island. At the end of the day, of the 30,000 men that have landed, there are more than 2,000 casualties and 600 dead. The predictions that the island would fall in 72 hours now seem wholly unrealistic. February 20th. The objective is to take Mount Suribachi under the code name Hot Rocks. In the early hours of the morning, new landings are made on the beach. The bombardment of the island continues, and some American troops manage to reach the plateau and place themselves between the airfields. The slopes of the hill become deadly rat traps for the U.S. soldiers. From their hideouts, the Japanese fire from all angles and kill hundreds of enemy soldiers. February 21st. The Marines are unable to advance to take the airfields. In the face of the disorientation produced by the Japanese movements underground, the Americans begin step-by-step movements using mortars, mines, and flamethrowers in an attempt to take Mount Suribachi. Enemy fire from all angles time and again stops the Marines from reaching their objective. Kamikazes attacked the U.S. ships, putting the aircraft carrier Saratoga out of action and sinking the USS Bismarck. During the night, the destroyers launch flares to light up the island and help the American troops in their attacks. The Japanese soldiers maintain silence to avoid giving away their positions. The next day, under heavy rain and in an atmosphere of extreme tension among the American troops, the first relief forces arrive. February 23rd. On the 5th day after the landings, a patrol of 40 Marines commanded by Lieutenant Schreier, carrying grenades and flamethrowers, manages to avoid the Japanese traps and advances to the summit of Mount Suribachi. At 10:37 in the morning, without securing the summit, 6 Marines, including Rene Gagnon, Ira Hamilton Hayes, and John Bradley, raise the U.S. flag, which Lieutenant Schreier carries tied to a length of water pipe. Following them is Joseph Rosenthal, Associated Press photographer and Pulitzer Prize winner, who immortalizes the moment together with cameraman Bill Gesnout, who dies only days afterwards. The capture of Mount Suribachi is not a decisive victory, although it serves to raise the morale of the American soldiers and sailors who sound their ship's sirens when they see the flag. But the heavily armed Japanese forces remain in their hideouts on the island. March 1945. The Marines' 3rd Division, made up of 60,000 men, push northwards. The sappers clear the minefields for the tanks that provide cover for the soldiers in their advance towards the main Japanese defense line. The advance is slow and costly, with the Americans having to fight for every meter against tenacious Japanese resistance. There is no place for pity. On the 4th of March, the 1st B-29, returning damaged from operations over Japan, is able to land on the southern airstrip, while the furious battle for Iwo Jima continues. By the 9th of March, the bulk of the Japanese defenders have been forced into the far northwest of the island, with their backs to the sea. In a small area, the Japanese have 300 bunkers, artillery, and traps in the most unlikely places. Large-scale movements are almost impossible. The fighting has to be done hand to hand. Frontal attacks on the Japanese positions are too costly in lives to continue with them. General Smith orders his men to carry out mopping up operations. Stealth and caution are required as they search out the Japanese inside their tunnels and fortifications, using flamethrowers and hand grenades. In mid-March, a radio message from General Kuribayashi to the Japanese troops is intercepted. We haven't eaten or drunk anything in 5 days, but our fighting spirit remains strong. We are going to fight on until the end. The Japanese troops still on the island put up tenacious resistance. Though on the 24th of March, their morale receives a heavy blow upon hearing the last words of their general. To all the officers and men, farewell. Except for isolated groups that still offer resistance and sporadic attacks by the Japanese in hiding, the Marines' battle for Iwo Jima has ended. On the 28th of March, General Holland Smith officially announces that the island is taken. The Americans needed the landing strips, and the Japanese time. In a sense, both got what they wanted, but 27,000 lives was the cost. 20,000 Japanese and 7,000 Americans. The densest battlefield became the most populated cemetery. Okinawa is the largest of the Ryukyu Islands. It is 96 kilometers north to south and 3 to 28 kilometers wide. In the north, it is mountainous, while the south has gently rolling hills with cliffs and caves. The invasion of this island poses a series of new problems, which the Americans have not faced in their attacks on other islands. Only 500 kilometers from Japan, Okinawa has 2 airports on the west of the island. It is an easy flying distance for the planes, whose bases and supplies are in Japan. The Americans cannot count on such a convenient facility for their planned invasion of Japan. The Japanese know this, and Admiral Chester Nimitz fears that taking the island will be an even harder battle than that of Iwo Jima. The Japanese troops are under the command of General Mitsuru Ushijima. With 80,000 men, his plan is to create a strong defensive line in Suri, in the south of the island, formed by hills and ravines which, as in Iwo Jima, lend themselves to the construction of defensive bunkers linked by tunnels and provide the scenario for a tense battle of attrition. The north, covered in vegetation, and the central plain will be left to the mercy of the American troops. The Japanese know that the attack on Okinawa is imminent. All their pilots and planes in China and Southeast Asia are ordered to return. A huge buildup of forces takes place on Kyushu, the southernmost Japanese island. Fighter squadrons are quickly transferred there to serve as escorts for the kamikaze attacks planned against the U.S. fleet and the British fleet under Vice Admiral Rawlings, which, united for the first time, have set sail for the islands occupied by the Japanese. The kamikaze pilots are in Kyushu, preparing themselves for their divine mission. Kamikaze attacks are not new to the Americans. What is extraordinary is not the weapon, but the will behind it. March 1945. Task Force 58, the fast aircraft carrier strike force commanded by Admiral Mark Mischer, sails to 160 kilometers from Kyushu and prepares to provide a shield against Japanese air attacks from the island, using its guns and planes to try to neutralize the enemy air force. The Japanese response is a fierce counterattack, using both conventional bombing and kamikaze attacks. The aircraft carrier Franklin is put out of action. The Wasp and the destructor Halsey Powell are seriously damaged, and the aircraft carriers Enterprise and Yorktown are also hit. The Japanese suffer 538 casualties, the Americans 1,300. The damage inflicted by the Americans on the Kyushu base means the Japanese are unable to attack with all those forces for some time. The commanders of the Allied fleet preparing for the assault on Okinawa know they have an enormous superiority, but they also are aware of the danger represented by the human bombs of the kamikaze. Half a million men, 300 warships, and 1,100 troop landing craft and other vessels are prepared for the operation. General Simon Buckner, commander of the 10th Army, is in charge of land forces, formed by the 24th and the 3rd Amphibious Marines Corps, totaling 183,000 men. April. With the bitter experience of Iwo Jima in mind, in the early hours of the 1st of April, the most intense bombardment of any of the Pacific Islands is unleashed. Shortly afterwards, the Allied forces in front of the coast of Okinawa get into the landing craft and head for the beaches. The infantry and Marines quickly establish a beachhead on the west coast. The Japanese resistance is surprisingly light, which recalls Iwo Jima. By midday, the Americans have already occupied half of the island, and the confidence of the troops is increasing. Before nightfall, the 50,000 men that have landed on the island have captured the two airports. At this moment, the biggest problem is accommodation and the welfare of the thousands of civilians of Okinawa, old people, women, and children. Pockets of resistance on the Motobu Peninsula, the central part and north, have been quickly overcome. Further south, the fears of the U.S. commanders are confirmed when they reach the defensive line of General Ushijima, which links Naha, Shuri, and Yonabaru. The angled fire coming from the fortifications on the hillsides quickly halts the Marines' advance and results in thousands of casualties. On April 6th, 699 Japanese planes, more than half of which are flown by kamikaze pilots, attacked the U.S. fleet near Okinawa. By the end of the day, the light aircraft carrier San Jacinto, 10 destroyers, and other escort ships have been sunk or seriously damaged. The kamikazes have carried out the most devastating attack to date. The crazed Japanese commanders believe the divine wind will sweep the enemy from the sea, and along with their kamikaze pilots, send the flagship Yamato on a suicide mission against the Allied fleet. On the 7th of April, after being attacked by U.S. dive bombers for 2 hours, the Japanese ship is sunk without being able to use its big guns. On the 11th and 12th of April, the Japanese launched their second Kiposhui attack with 185 planes. The Americans, who have received the news of the sudden death of President Roosevelt, step up their offensive in search of victory, sending reinforcements into battle. The kamikazes continue to strike at sea, while on land, U.S. forces fight hand-to-hand with the entrenched Japanese, prepared to defend their positions until the last breath. The tactics employed by Ushijima are inflicting a heavy toll on the American forces. But the U.S. fleet has a devastating impact as mobile artillery. The defenders cannot do anything against it. But the big question is whether the ships will be able to endure the terrible kamikaze attacks. May. On May 11, 1945, 150 Japanese planes take part in the 6th Kipushui attack. A third of them go for the destroyers Evans and Hadley. Both are put out of action, although they managed to shoot down 37 enemy planes. Not a high price for the Japanese in return for the powerful destroyers. The kamikaze way is a kind of madness, but it is also the most lethal weapon the Japanese possess. June. On June 24th, the 6th Marines Division launches an amphibious attack on the Araku Peninsula on the south of the island. The slow and methodical fight of small patrols in hand-to-hand combat results in the deaths of 5,000 Japanese soldiers and leads to hundreds surrendering. The coordination of U.S. tanks and infantry is meeting with success, while mopping up operations are undertaken by the squads armed with flamethrowers and hand grenades, going from bunker to bunker to put an end to the fanatical Japanese resistance. July. By the 2nd of July, the conquest of the island is almost complete, though some surviving Japanese soldiers have formed guerrilla units that carry out sporadic attacks against the American troops. August. On the night of August the 14th, 1945, fireworks light up the sky over Okinawa. The word victory appears before the amazed eyes of the Japanese soldiers still on the island. Over the following days, they begin to surrender, finally accepting what their emperor had told them was unacceptable: defeat. The Americans have lost 12,500 men and 15 ships. The Japanese have suffered 110,000 casualties, including dead and disappeared, with many soldiers choosing to commit suicide by throwing themselves from cliffs rather than be made prisoners. A further 70,000 civilians have been killed in the constant heavy bombardments. The Okinawa campaign was not encouraging for either side. If the Japanese had fought so ferociously for this island, what would they not do to defend their own homeland? Okinawa was the last battle of the Second World War. The key to U.S. air strategy is the revolutionary B-29. These heavily armed bombers, the largest in the war, are capable of flying at an altitude of 38,000 feet and carrying 7,000 kilos of bombs. Since November 24, 1944, the U.S. Air Force has been carrying out raids on Japan to reduce its industrial and military capacity. The Japanese have reorganized their island defense system to deal with the threat posed by the B-29s, transferring special air defense squadrons to the country's largest cities and most important industrial areas. Since the first months of 1945, the B-29 raids have had a devastating effect on Japan's war production, already badly hit by the blockade and loss of air bases abroad. Japan is facing disaster. The casualties produced by the air raids are more numerous than all those suffered to date by the Army. The Air Force is losing catastrophic numbers of planes, almost 2,000 in 1 month. The civilian population, malnourished and exhausted, is reaching the limit of its endurance. As a last resort, hundreds of Japanese planes have been thrown against the B-29s in kamikaze attacks, as the American bombers cannot be brought down from the ground. Japanese pilots throw away their lives over the cities, and the headlong rush towards disaster continues. On the morning of August 6, 1945, in a question of seconds, 70,000 people are killed and as many again seriously wounded. The first atomic bomb has razed Hiroshima. Before Japan has had time to recover from this Holocaust, another atomic bomb is dropped on Nagasaki on the 9th. On the 17th of August, the Japanese government decides to accept the unpalatable Allied proposal and surrender unconditionally. The atomic bomb has made all resistance useless. Officially, the end comes on the 2nd of September 1945 at 10:30 in the morning. The Second World War is over. The commanders who were planning the invasion of Japan and estimating 1 million casualties have been overtaken by events. Despite the attempts by a group of young extremist military officers to prevent the emission of the message, the Emperor Hirohito addresses the nation, announcing the surrender and calling for people to collaborate with the victors. 23,000 Allied soldiers are liberated from the inhumane conditions of concentration camps, the length and breadth of Japan, and begin to return to their homes in different countries. Japanese sailors guide the ships of the American fleet through the wreckage of vessels destroyed in bombing raids on Tokyo Bay, where the battleship Missouri is located. September. On board the ship, on September 2nd, 1945, General Douglas MacArthur, as Supreme Commander of Allied Powers, and Admiral Chester Nimitz, representing the United States forces, together with General Percival, a prisoner since the fall of Singapore, and General Wainwright, held captive since the surrender of the Philippines, request the Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu and General Yoshihiro Umezo to sign the capitulation in the name of the Japanese state and army. The Allies have accepted the only Japanese condition. The Emperor is to stay. The conflict that has engulfed 61 countries and more than half of the Earth's population in all continents is over. The exact number of deaths will never be known, but it is estimated at more than 55 million. The Allied occupation of Japan begins officially on September the 4th, 1945. In an unprecedented act in Japanese history, Emperor Hirohito visits General Douglas MacArthur. Never before has a member of the imperial family acted in such a manner. The military commanders that led Japan into war are tried by military tribunal for the crimes they have committed. Lieutenant General Masaharu Homa, responsible for the Bataan Death March, sentenced to be shot by firing squad. Lieutenant General Tomiyuki Yamashita, responsible for the sack of Manila and the deaths of 60,000 people, sentenced to be hanged. Wartime Prime Minister Hideki Toho, Japan's #1 war criminal, tries to commit suicide but fails. He too will later be hanged. International controversy rages around Emperor Hirohito, with many calling for his execution for not using his position to try to stop the war. But the Allies consider that his influence can now be beneficial for building the peace. Hirohito addresses Parliament and makes a decisive statement before his 80 million subjects. Under the new constitution, he will keep the title of emperor but renounce all political power. He is to become a symbol of the unity of the state. The war is over. Once again in its long history, the world breathes the air of peace. But it is a peace overshadowed by the atomic bomb.